Various viewpoints and beliefs presented on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the management, the affiliates and broadcast partners, or the sponsors. Listener discretion is advised.
Scarefest Radio, the radio you can see.
And hello and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Scarefest Television. God, August 23rd, 2024. We're like, Scarefest is like next week or something like that, something ridiculous like that. So anyway, tonight I have, Joe will be coming along with his Alien Romulus movie review. Chad Harlan makes his triumphant comeback to Scarefest TV. It seems like forever since you've been on the show, but it's only
been too long, but no. I always miss it when I'm not here.
But yeah, you Charles Romans, you were there with Charlie, but it just seems like forever. And my lovely and talented and smartest person in the room, guest, Stephanie Bingham.
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming back. You, next to Chad, you are the one person that I can always count on. I'm just going to put it out there. You've never turned me down to come on this show, despite my blathering about how beautiful you are. And probably there's a lawsuit in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Everybody, we have 5 celebrity announcements tonight. We have what else was that? I don't know. Anyway, Stephanie is presenting at Scarefest this year, and she is presenting, the name of this is When We Feared Vampires, Historic Vampires, and Modern Paranormal Occurrences. So, I'm taking it from the title that we're not talking about goth teenagers that bite each other's arms.
Not a lot, only a little.
Well, then who's afraid of them? That's like voluntary.
Exactly.
Okay, well, okay. When did we fear vampires?
The New England Vampire Panic. There was a time period, roughly about 100 years, where it was making front page news, and we were going out and we were staking a lot of girls who were already dead.
What good's that? Stake them before they're dead, and then you don't have to worry about it.
But when they're still alive, they're not a vampire. Have to wait till after they're dead to be a vampire.
Actually, I find that stabbing someone in the heart with a wooden stake works on everybody.
It certainly does. It does cut down on the later vampires.
So they actually what caused the New England Vampire Panic?
The rise of tuberculosis, consumption specifically. It was ravaging all up and down sort of the eastern seaboard, and specifically in Rhode Island. There were tons and tons of these cases where these young women who died were picked out as the vampires. There was lots of suspects, but the ladies were the ones who clearly were coming back to feed on the dead or feed on the living. But after you get out of that sort of New England, you start getting these really strange occurrences in like Virginia and Nebraska. And if you go back a little further, you're going to end up with the Casket Girls down in New Orleans. So there was a lot of vampires traipsing around the U.S.
I'm trying to figure out why somebody would think tuberculosis was vampire related. I mean, I realize they call it consumption, but it also involves coughing up blood. And I was just going through my notes the other day and doing a Wikipedia search, and under vampires, guess what doesn't appear? Coughing.
Tuberculosis. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It doesn't make a lot of sense to sort of that modern idea until you start looking at what a vampire was at the time. A vampire wasn't an animated corpse that got up walking around. it was a disembodied spirit. It was a soul that could not rest, that came back at night and would sit on the chest of their victims, sort of the old hag, and they were causing the tuberculosis in the other people. So if you kill the vampire, you cure the tuberculosis. Theoretically.
People are sick. Chad, over to you.
Stephanie, as Wes said, you're always one of the most prepared, best presentations every year. I kick myself the years that I can't get to your presentation because I'm tied up somewhere else because I've
got important
learned
things to do.
So much. I talk on the microphone. It's not that important, but they do notice if I'm not
Very
there.
important.
But like I said, your presentations are always extremely interesting and informative in the subjects you come up with. But this year, I'm excited to learn more about the vampires and the history of that in the U.S. through you. I know you talk about the New England vampire panic.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the most famous one, at least to me, is Mercy Brown.
Always.
Was she one of the first, or is she just? How did she end up being kind of the poster girl of the vampirism in early America?
That's a very good way of putting that. Mercy is actually the very last vampire of the New England vampire panic. And I think that really comes down to the fact that her vampire eradication was very well documented. As in, they had reporters there. Within a month of her disinterment and them removing her as a vampire, it was across the country. It was syndicated in newspapers all across the U.S. Everybody knew this story. And suddenly you have all these eyes from outside this sort of 100-mile radius where all these vampires are happening, looking at them and saying, what are you doing? Why are you digging people up? Why are you burning organs? And why are you feeding them to the living? Like, you get lots of side eye at that point. And people got really freaked out because Mercy came from this very nice family. And she was sort of the wild child daughter of the era, but there was nothing outwardly wrong about her. She sort of falls into that Lizzie Borden category. She's a fine, upstanding lady. Nobody knows why we are picking her. But they did, and people around the world didn't like it.
You talked a little bit about our interpretation or idea of what a vampire is has changed through time. Can you walk us through a little bit of the evolution and where the idea? I know every culture has some version of a vampire. So if we go to early New England, obviously we're going to come from European ideas. Yes. But can you give us a little bit of an idea of what some of the various ideas and the evolution up to that point and up to modern? Wes talked about the goth teenagers, and I'm sure we'll touch on that in a little while. There. Especially here in Kentucky.
Right? There's a story. So you have this idea of a hungry spirit that goes back at least to ancient Egypt, where you would leave offerings for the dead at altars to keep them from coming back and feasting on the living. And that's very sort of in line with what people thought a vampire was in early New England. But there were vampires from all cultures. In Asia, there was one that flew around as sort of a disembodied head, finding people. And like every culture has this idea of something that is dead coming back to prey on the living. And you really get that sort of modern vampire idea from sort of Eastern Europe. Dracula. I mean, this is the Strigoi. You're coming out of that tradition. You're coming out of that culture. So that's where you get this idea of the count. You know, if you're going to save yourself from vampires at the time, it wasn't uncommon to put like very small seeds out in your yard because the idea was the vampire was so OCD they'd have to sit and they'd have to stop and count every single one. Or put a net over your door and window so they had to untie every knot. And that would allow you to avoid the vampire until dawn. That's really all you have to do. Because in most of these cultures, at dawn, the spirit or the ghoul will have to go back to their grave and you are safe until dusk again. So it's all of these sort of traditions coming together and coming to New England, generally by way of the casket girls. They're really the first sort of modern vampire in the way we think of them to sort of come to the U.S. And they came in through New Orleans and Biloxi and a couple of other cities, but New Orleans being the really famous ones. And these were French ladies who were coming over, and their story got real wild real quick. So lots of weirdness, lots.
And that brings us to New Orleans, which is
Right. The best vampires.
the best, and probably every story you hear, including multiple famous cases from Kentucky of vampirism and witchcraft.
Yep.
Tends to be some story of people trying to get to New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
So it still has that call.
It absolutely does.
So what prompted you to be interested in looking into this topic?
I have always been fascinated by vampires. It's one of those things that just sort of was always there for me. Like, I've had all of these paranormal experiences since I was a very young child. Seen ghosts, all these things. I went to college, and that's what I was looking at. I was looking at ghosts specifically. But I found that when I started looking at ghosts, even when I was looking at the spiritualist movement, I'm looking at women who are specifically talking to ghosts. There is this idea of psychical vampirism that is going around at that time. Vampires and paranormal psychics, really, however you want to place that, really go hand in hand throughout U.S. history, and you can't really have one without the other if you start looking at how it comes in the text. Like, they are there no matter what you do. And so I started adding vampires into my spiritualist thesis, and my professor was very confused. But, it worked. It's all good.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point that maybe we can come back to in a little while is you talked about the idea of an undead entity or somebody from the dead coming back to feed off humans. How does that transition to the idea, and I know it's become more and more at least known, the psychical vampire? How does that transition occur?
So I really don't think the transition goes the way most people expect it to. Historically speaking, a lot of people expected what you might think of as a psychical vampire, or a vampire that's not connected to a body. That's not to be confused with psychic vampires, which are an entirely different category of energy creatures. But the idea of the psychical vampire, this sort of disembodied spirit that has to feed to continue to exist, goes back really as far as we have any record of. It's really when you start getting things like Dracula, and then a little later when you get Anne Rice and all of this, that you get this sort of corpse, attractive corpse, but a corpse coming back to sort of stalk the ground. That's more of a modern idea. In the past, you have a corpse coming back, you're looking at a ghoul, or you're looking at a zombie, you're looking at something not vampiric. But then if you look at some of the vampire stories of the US around the same time, if we saw these same things today, we'd call them a dog man. But they're vampires at that point in time. So it's this weird sort of mismatch of what do we call the cryptid.
Well, I'm interested to hear more. We'll be back in just a minute with Stephanie. We're going to our first break.
This is a 2024 Scarefest Weekend sponsoring vendor. The Bombs makes bath and body products for everyone. Ashley Dobbs makes unique small batch hand-painted bath bombs, plus sugar scrubs, whip soaps, and body oils. Find the Bombs on Facebook and at the monthly Central Kentucky Mystical Market in Lexington. Scarefest Weekend sponsoring vendors make the event happen. Be sure to tell them that you heard it here on Scarefest TV.
Today's Crypt features deals with talents in the horror community, from mask makers, sculptors, artists, and more. Plus, podcast Live in the Crypt, shooting the shiz with BK and the Swag, and BK and the Bees, Horror Buzz. Visit their website, join their Facebook group, and thank them for being a Scarefest sponsoring vendor.
And welcome back, everybody, to Scarefest Television. Our guest tonight is Stephanie Bingham, and we're talking vampires. First of all, I just want to say, everybody, Chad is kicking my ass tonight on quality of questions, and don't look for that to get any better on my part. Okay, first of all, we can't just gloss over, who the hell did you say had a disembodied head as vampire legend?
So that is not one of my personal specialties, but there is a Asiatic vampire that is, well, what we would call a vampire now. a disembodied head that has sort of entrails falling from it that would chase you through the night and feed on you. Like, that is what it is. It's a very strange one, and it's one that I can't quite wrap my brain around.
Like on Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah,
have you seen that yet?
Very
Okay.
much the same.
See? Okay. Makes perfect sense now. Okay, now, when... actually, I'm not going to say when, because I know the answers to that. I think I know it anyway, but you're so versed in everything. Do any cultures ever that you've come across, did any of them even mention the vampires sparkling?
In no text that I have read, from a psychical vampire or a physical vampire, have I found any evidence that anybody thought vampires sparkled.
Okay. Now, I do want to clarify, a minute ago, did you actually tell Chad that somebody believed that if you just tied your curtains in really good knots, you could keep the vampire out?
Not so much your curtains, but if you put a net
it
over
had to be
your
a net.
windows, yeah, you have to untie each and every knot because the vampire is a count. That idea that the counting is a thing, like that was a folk remedy for vampires, to put tiny seeds like sesame seeds out, or to tie nets over doors so that you have to untie every knot and count every seed, can give you enough time to get away from the vampire.
Okay. God forbid a vampire came in with scissors. Now the real question here, how do you, I know you have an actual job that you pay the rent with. How do you find time to do all this research that you do?
Well, bear in mind that my actual job does involve ghosts as well, but a lot of it is just my free time. Like, you get home from work and you need something to do, so I'm going to the library and finding all, the vampire things from the Times-Picayune. Isn't that what you do?
No, but then again, I have no free time, so,
That's true. I have more free time than you do.
I'm spending all my free time creating new podcasts so that I can act silly, just like this one. Now, okay, one final question before I throw you over to Chad. What are you wearing this year to do your presentation?
I actually don't know yet. I have a really cute little corset top that I'm thinking about, so that's in the lead right now.
Sounds good. Chad!
Okay.
On that note, let's talk about vampires for a while.
Let's do it!
I want to go ahead and hit on this before we get too far later in the show. This is a Kentucky-based show. This is a Kentucky-based convention. You're going to be talking there. Let's talk about Visaggio.
Let's do it. Where do you want to start on that?
Tell people who don't know, and like I said, if this is a major part of your presentation, let's not get too far into it, but give people an idea of Rod Farrell and Kentucky's ties to vampirism.
So I actually didn't include him in my presentation because, to my mind, everyone in Kentucky knows this story. So I was looking at some of the other ones. Got no goddamn
idea. Go ahead.
Really?
Yeah, I don't believe so.
Oh, so there was
nobody under the age of 40 knows this story. It happened in the 90s. That's ancient history.
I was drunk. Go ahead.
Well, there we go. So there was a group of teenagers in Western Kentucky in the 90s who believed that they were vampires. Visago was the name of the leader, his vampiric self, if you will, Rod Farrell. And he had a girlfriend down in Florida, and she was telling him how bad a situation she was in. So he decided to take a couple of his friends down there, and they were going to rescue her. And that ended up with the vampires from Kentucky taking an axe, I believe, to the parents until their face looked like hamburger was the description. And then they decided the best way to escape was to steal her family's car and drive to New Orleans, where, all vampires go. So, yeah, real weird story.
Yeah, and I mean, at the time, of course, it was the height of the satanic panic was going on, and I guess apparently there historically has been quite a vampire community in Murray, Kentucky, tied to the university.
I find that most universities have a vampire community in sort of the modern sense. You find a lot of them in the big cities, but you find a lot of them in the Midwest where people aren't expecting them. People don't know where to look for vampires, but they're really everywhere. Anybody that sort of identifies with that archetype, be they a lifestyler or someone who is a psychic vampire, or a little bit rare these days, but people who actually drink blood.
Well, and that brings up a good point. Let's talk about the different types of vampires there.
All right. The current ones?
Yeah, you said lifestyle. You
Right.
named several off there. Let's talk about a little bit of the difference between the different types of vampires in modern parlance.
Parlance. Yes. So you have the lifestyler. That's someone who doesn't necessarily identify themselves as a vampire, but they like the aesthetic. They like enjoying sort of the trappings of a vampire, be it the look or sort of the nighttime schedule and that sort of vampire allure. So they're going to dress the part, they're going to talk the part. They are what you might think of as someone who's, walking around town in the long trench coat or the long cape and doing the whole thing. And then you have the psychic vampires, which are a group of people who are actually generally born, with an energy deficiency, so they have to take energy from those around them. This is different than your like emotional vampire, which is attacking someone to make a strong emotion, generally anger or fear or sadness, and feeding off of that. But a psychic vampire is going to large groups of people, and they are essentially taking energy off the top. They are doing something to supplement their own body's energetic production so that they can continue functioning as a human. And then you have the sanguine vampires, who are the ones who drink blood. You don't see as many of those these days, or I haven't. And they're ones that will take blood from a consensual donor. This is generally very sterile, generally done with like a lancet and the whole bit, and generally done with someone who is super tested. The vampire community is very big on, making sure there's not a lot of bloodborne diseases traveling about, but they're going to drink a very small amount of blood as a way to supplement their energy, much like the psychic vampire, just without the blood, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And like we touched on, Rod Farrell was trying to get to New Orleans.
Yeah, he was.
There is a large presence, and
Yep.
my experience in New Orleans has been that it's like you said, people don't know where to look. It's not always the people you expect to be vampires down there that are practicing that lifestyle.
Yep. I would very much agree with that. A vampire can look like anything, especially when you're in a city like New Orleans and you're dealing with the sort of modern idea of vampire. If you're talking about the modern vampire community, they could literally be your barista. You would not know the difference unless they decided to tell you this. They're not all jumping up and down and saying, "Hey, I'm a vampire, look at me." It's just not that sort of thing, you know?
They're not like
It's
vegans then.
Right. They're a lot quieter than a vegan. But it's very much sort of the same idea. It is a lifestyle that they participate in. It's something that they either feel like they have to do or it gives them joy to do. And they're going to do it on their free time. And the rest of the time, they are a normal functioning member of society.
In fact, in that city, they're a large portion of the economy.
They really are. And I mean, it gives New Orleans something special. Where else can you go on just a straight up vampire tour with a guide who may or may not identify themselves as a vampire?
Last time I was there, we were in a bar one night, and then the next night we did a vampire tour. And the first thing the tour guide said was, "If you've been to this bar, it's actually owned by a BDSM vampire cult." So of course, we went back every night.
Yep. Yep.
But
yeah, I think you know what we're talking about.
But it's a very interesting topic, and people knee-jerk reaction, especially in modern day, is there's no such thing. But
right.
As you've touched on, depending on your definition, when do you become a vampire?
Exactly.
If you're living the lifestyle, are you not technically a vampire, especially a sanguine vampire? If that's what you're doing, are you not technically one? And it's always interesting to hear people's reactions.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. I think people really expect it to be this super fringe thing, and I guess to some extent it is fringe, but it's not nearly as uncommon as people think it is.
Like I said, I've run across it in my travels several times, and I'm certainly not going to places that are fringe. But for some reason, I come across it.
I mean, maybe they're following you for a reason.
That's scary thought. With that, before we go to another topic, why don't we go ahead and toss to our mid-show break, and we'll be back in a few minutes with Stephanie Bingham.
Are you a fan of horror movies, books, comics, music, and collectibles? Roomorg magazine is for you. Subscribe today to receive 6 or 12 print issues annually and join me, executive editor Andrea Subasati, on an ongoing journey through the horror genre of the past, present, and future. Plus, get access to unmissable special editions such as A Century of Witches, 50 Years of Gore Cinema, British horror movies, and so much more. Roomorg, the world's premier horror and culture and entertainment magazine since 1997. Accept no substitute.
Our first announcement of the evening, Barbie Wilde is coming back to Scarefest Weekend. Of course, from Hellborn, that's Hellraiser 2, Grizzly 2 The Revenge, Dark Ditties presents something or another, and Death Wish 3. What is that? Morons from Outer Space. That one I might have to look up. Anyway, Barbie Wilde is our first celebrity announcement of the evening. Next up, Nicholas Vince. Nicholas Vince, of course, from Hellraiser and Hellraiser 2 and The Black Gloves and I Am Monsters, Book of Monsters. So yes, we got another one. Nicholas Vince. And of course, if you bring those two, you got to bring Dave Sheridan. I've been faster, you've been slower. I could have really built that up good. Dave Sheridan's coming back to Scarefest. Scary movie fame. Also, Haunted House 2. Victor Crowley. That's right. Anyway, Dave Sheridan is coming to a Scarefest. And finally, hey, remember the mountain monsters that everybody loved? Well, we got a couple of them coming this year. Jeff Headley and Willie McWellen are coming to Scarefest. Now, this past week we put dinner with Greg Nicotero on, that's down to Nick and Norman's. We put that on sale this week. So, that happens on Sunday, the 20th, 7 p.m. So this will be the grand finale of Scarefest, if you will. So if you were wanting, this was one of those things that people were waiting for, and then they got a buzz about it when we announced Greg, and then everybody said, well, when can we have it? Guess what? Sunday. Sunday. So dinner with Greg Nicotero at Nick and Norman's is on sale. Scarefest Weekend, click tickets. Hey, now this one I got a bone pick with you. This event should already have sold out, because when we do polls in the fan group, we said, what would you all like to see for an after hours event? Ghost Hunt. It's like 90% and 10% for all this other stuff. This has not sold out yet. It's sold good. It's over 50% sold out. But that event should already be sold out, just because that's, we went out of our way to do this because that's what the fans wanted. And if you don't buy a ticket, you should feel guilty. There, I said it. Now, this one has not been selling off the charts either, but I think it's because we really haven't advertised. I had to dig to find this. Tactical Zombie Experience with Daniel Harris, Tyler Main, and Scout Taylor Compton. Go to budsgunshopky.com. Budsgunshopky.com is behind this Night of the Zombie. You get to fire actual guns and be a part of this and kill whatever type of zombies. By the way, I forgot in the staff meeting, we need volunteer zombies. We gotta ask about that. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding about that. But yes, here, if you missed this event, look it up. budsgunshopky.com, budsgunshopkentucky.com. The Tactical Zombie Experience. Now I want to give a shout out to Eugene Clark's Big Daddy Zombie Productions LLC. He's a featured vendor at Scarefest this year. Eugene Clark from Land of the Dead. Hey, another featured vendor you should check out. This will be in booth 222, Glamoria, with lots of little nifty gift items there. Glamoria will be at Scarefest. And finally, tonight I want to point out a new one on board. This is a new featured vendor, Chocolate Treasures. Chocolate Treasures with all kinds of spooky looking snacks. Now, this just came out this week, and now this is not the one at Scarefest. We're having another karaoke night, and is that on the back? I can't read the banner to tell you what day it is. That's embarrassing. Anyway, look on Facebook on our fan group, and there is a Live Wire Entertainment Pivot Brewing. We watched the movie, the podcast at Scarefest Weekend, or I think it's the.
It's the 31st from 8 to 11.
31st of this month.
Yes, a week from today.
There, I knew it. Karaoke party. So come check out at Pivot Brewing in Lexington. Hey, we're on the final week of the Scarefest Horror Film Festival. If you or a friend or loved one, or just somebody you happen to know, has an independent horror film, they should be submitting it now through Film Freeway. Go to scarefestweekend.com, click the film festival link, and get that done. But this is the last week to get the films in. And a little project we've got on the side, Scarefest TV presents Gussied Up Magic. It is available through my Patreon project and at scarefestradio.com by description. But our Hexes and Curses was last week. They're talking about covens this coming week. But Gussied Up Magic, if you know the three Appalachian witches, Pat O'Keefe, Misty Connor, and Ashley Connor, you should check that out at scarefestradio.com. Now here's one. This is a working title because I forgot the really cool name for this that I wanted. If any of you would like to dabble your toes into the podcasting field, I'm going to be accepting here in the near future 15 to 30 minute, 45 minute, however long you want to do it, movie reviews of horror movies. This will be presented as a podcast. You just give me basically, it'll be if you just sit in front of your camera and talk about a movie for however long you want, then I will come in, produce it a little bit, and then we'll release it as a subscription podcast at scarefestradio.com. So if you have aspirations to be a podcast host or just to be part of the team or just to talk smack about movies, that'll be coming up. Hey, now I'm going to have a busy weekend. September 28th, I'm running a 5K at Coldstream Park in Lexington, and Mama Ruby's is my sponsor. Then I leave there and go to Mama Ruby's in Bowling Green because she's having the bazaar that same weekend. So it's going to be a busy weekend for me. But everybody, I hope you support me. And that's all through my Patreon project. That's where I talk about how out of shape I am and how I can't run very far and fast. But you get other benefits too. So anyway, if you want to support me, go to patreon.com/ScarefestRadio. Subscriptions start at just $1 a month. And the Central Kentucky Mystery Market September dates, go ahead and write them in your calendar. Also on that weekend, September 28th and 29th. It's going to be a busy weekend all the way around. And if you haven't marked this in your, people don't use calendars anymore. Find a calendar. February 15th, 2025. The Caribbean Carnival. The Caribbean Carnival. Trust me, you want to be there. It'll be at the Clarion. A night of dancing and fun with people wearing funny hats. That sounds good. I might run the okay.
Well, let me make a quick correction before we get going again. Okay. The pivot event for Karaoke is the 31st. That's actually a week from tomorrow. It's not on Friday night.
Okay. Yeah, it was Saturday. But I mean, I rounded up. You were cool. Okay. The first question in my list here for you, Stephanie. Stephanie Bingham, our presenter, our lovely guest tonight. Why do you even put up with me?
Because you're amusing.
She finds me amusing. Okay. Why do you think that New Orleans attracts all the weird people?
Because it started out weird. New Orleans really didn't have a chance. It started out as sort of a penal colony. So it's where you send all the people who are in trouble. It was somewhere that you put people that you didn't know what else to do with. And very early on in that history, where these people are literally living in a swamp, a city that's below sea level, they started shipping over women and their caskets, these boxes. And you suddenly have people going missing, their husbands going missing. So clearly vampires are showing up almost immediately in the city. But you have this weird melting pot of all these different cultures, this sort of Caribbean influence, this French influence, this Spanish influence, this American influence a little later. It's just the perfect sort of European American city. It had everything going for it, and there were no rules, basically.
Had everything going for it under sea level. Got it. Oh, by the way, Chad says he doesn't do Fringe and then spends a week in a BDSM club. Right, dude. Okay, now from the chat room, Cambridge vampires. I don't know anything about that. Is that something that's part of your topic? Someone asked, actually. Apparently knows much more than me.
That is not one of the topics, no.
Okay. What are Cambridge vampires? Is that just like a subsect of New England vampires, or?
I would think so, but that is not one that I have looked into.
By golly, that's the first question I've ever asked you didn't know about. I believe that was it. Now, on a, for me, a more serious note, more, and let's think more classic paranormal vampire, okay? Do you believe in vampires?
As far as a resurrected corpse that's running around and chewing on people, no.
Okay.
I don't think that is a thing. I don't think there's even a historical context to be looking for that outside of like a ghoul, literally something digging its way up to dig its way back down. But you have this historic idea of the hungry ghost, and that does appear in pretty much all cultures worldwide. And so from an anthropological standpoint, I really think we have to give that a lot of credence because so many people are talking about it from so many different places. It becomes not truly to a level of an anthropological truth, but it is a cross-cultural fact that people are afraid of or believe in the power of the dead to come back and feed on the living.
That's close enough. I count
right?
I count that. Now, I'm on the fence on vampires, but I was on the fence about Dogman, and then they were like, killing people. So anyway,
right?
So yeah, so let's. But I firmly believe in. Now I like the way you broke it down: psychic vampires and emotional vampires.
Yes,
I had never made that delineation.
Very different.
It's to me, it's just a sweet tooth versus liking salty foods.
Okay,
well,
I've never heard it put quite that way.
it's an emotional drain.
Yes. Yes,
I'm the king of the torture analogy. If you didn't know.
I mean, very much so with that.
But yeah, so do you believe that some people, and at a psychic level, a full on a gift, if you want to call it that, or a curse?
I absolutely believe that psychic vampires are a real thing. Yes, people that need to take energy from others.
Now, do you think, and this might go both ways, do you think they do it purposely and know that they do it, or is it just like a tumor?
Great analogy. So most of them, when they're starting out, don't realize what they're doing until they start seeing the effects on others. The ones who have some level of compassion for the world around them will then start to understand what they're doing, and they will start putting rules on it for themselves, or they will start feeding off of large groups as opposed to individuals to avoid hurting groups of people.
Vampires. I like it. Chad!
Stephanie, as you started doing your research for this, and it sounds like it's been an extensive process, that this is a topic that has drawn your interest for quite some time.
Yeah.
What's something you found about vampires or the vampiric lore that surprised you?
The one thing, especially in the historical accounts, that surprised me were the number of accounts of these really strange occurrences that today we would never call a vampire. But at the time, they did not have anything else to blame it on, so it became a vampire. It's some very strange, like, animal mutilation sort of situations, and, just things that aren't vampiric at all in today's day and age. Like, the idea of, the things that jump super high and jump over walls, almost Spring Hill Jack sort of situations, that are being lumped in with vampires. And it's like, why is that a vampire? Because by your own definitions and the way you understand vampires in their context, it wouldn't be. So why is vampire such a broad, encompassing topic of the time?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that, but yeah, I guess from that standpoint, at one point they would have probably lumped in chupacabra.
Absolutely.
And that sort of phenomenon.
Absolutely. The ones that really get me are the ones where you have these, like, they describe creatures, bipedal creatures that are humanoid but not human, that are dismembering animals, like removing limbs and like feasting on these things, that will then like hide in trees, and they're like, this is totally a vampire. And I'm like, how is that a vampire? Please explain. I don't understand.
Yeah, that's a little different than the modern idea or interpretation. But
yeah,
I mean, thinking back to some of the novels and the literary representations, I mean, there's a taste of that in some of the early vampire novels, mainly from transmorphation. I didn't say that right, but you know what
I know what you're talking about. You could get it there. You could get a taste of it in Dracula's Guest, the original opening to Dracula, but then you're dealing with a werewolf. Because to me, like, that sort of modern vampire starts with Camilla. Like, that is the story that to me is the start of that sort of modern idea. But you have, like, we have vampires, we have werewolves. Why then are these creatures that are skulking the Midwest vampires and not a werewolf? That's one of the things that I just cannot wrap my brain around. And then you have this like wave of people being brought to the US, a bunch of immigrants that are suddenly all vampires. And we're, then finding people that we never get rid of, but they never go away. It becomes very almost ghostly at certain points in the stories as well.
And I can see in the modern accounts where there's kind of a unification of the different ideas. So like you said, you take an idea like that, you take the native idea, the Wendigo, and you start putting stuff together, and you get elements of all of that in kind of the modern mythology.
Exactly. A lot of the stories, especially from the Midwest, read very Skinwalker to me. Like, if you're just looking at native lore, that is what it reads to me. Like, that's what comes to my brain. But vampire, that's the label that is slapped on it. It's just vampire, which is just very strange to me.
We're coming up on our final break, so we're going to go ahead and pause. We'll be back with a few more minutes with Stephanie after this.
Treat Studios is a Scarefest Weekend sponsoring vendor. Trick or Treat Studios is the one-stop shop for high-quality Halloween and horror. Shop masks, costumes, figures, collectibles, games, and more from your favorite movies. Find Trick or Treat Studios online at trickortreatstudios.com.
Joel Robinson Hart is a Scarefest Weekend sponsoring vendor. Joel Robinson has been the official Scarefest Weekend artist since its beginning in 2008. Joel is a movie cover artist and a Universal Monsters artist. Visit Joel for posters, canvases, t-shirts, purses, and backpacks. Visit Joel's Etsy page at joelrobinsonart.com.
Hey, Scarefest, this is Joe Lewis of Bonehead Weekly with a review of a movie that's actually in theaters, and I'm excited about it. I went and saw it with my good friend, well, he's not really a good friend, but Chad, Alien Romulus. Alien Romulus, directed by a person whom, to me, hasn't made only one bad movie, and I love his first two films, Fede Alvarez. Huge fan of him. I loved his Evil Dead reboot. I'm still a big fan. I still go out and support it all the time. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around Alien Romulus. And the problem is that Chad really liked it, and I thought it was pretty good-ish, but it's just so much fan service. And I know Ghostbusters Afterlife and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, both, there's so much fan service. And not to give away too many spoilers, but there's a character that's brought back that's just unnecessary, in my opinion. It doesn't even look good. I love the third act, or the first act of the movie, where we see some of these planets where they're terraforming, and it takes place between Alien and Aliens, right? It takes before Aliens actually happens, and they're terraforming. And you can imagine, in reality, these worlds would suck, and people die of diseases because humans, you're just an animal walking around, your flesh and blood, and so you catch diseases. And we follow these characters who want to get off planet, and the system's rigged, and they can't get off. They have to do so many years of servitude, and we follow this young lady who has an android who's kind of broken, and the guy that plays the android is fantastic. And they come up with an idea where they find out that there's a derelict space station above. Now, never mind, why is it just sitting there? Why hasn't Weyland-Yutani put a rope around it for everything? You know what's in it. They go up to try to get these pods that they sleep in, the hibernation things across space, because it's 10 years to get to this sweet-ass planet that they want to go to. It doesn't work out because imagine what's at you're right, you know where this is going. I give him kudos, Fede Alvarez, for doing practical effects. I give him kudos for so many throwbacks. And when someone says, and I've read this a couple times as a review because I know a lot of you love it, Fede understood the assignment. I agree. And it's not just a throwback to Alien and Aliens. There's a lot of Alien Resurrection and Prometheus in this movie as well. He takes from a lot of it, and I get it, world building and making it all connect. The issue is there's a few things that just don't make any sense, like the space station. Why doesn't Weyland-Yutani already have that locked off? Why is it just up there randomly? There's a bunch of stuff. How'd they get the ship to get up there in the first place? Never mind all that. There's just so much fan service. There's one particular line from Aliens that one character says, and at the time, it doesn't even make sense other than, oh my God, did you hear that? That's what Sigourney Weaver said in Aliens. Doesn't make sense. I love some of it. The throwback to she's wearing the same shoes that Sigourney's wearing in 86. I love that. I love the practical sets that they're in. They're huge sets. I loved a lot of the movie. I have so many questions. And a lot of the questions I can't really talk to you about because you haven't seen the movie and I don't want to give away spoilers. Some of you, there's going to be this thing at the end that's going to be a big callback to Prometheus. And you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. I actually liked a little bit of that. The thing that some people are complaining about. Alien Romulus is still probably better than most of it. Although I don't know that there's a terrible Alien movie. There's some terrible scenes, but I enjoy scenes. Even in Alien versus Predator, the second one, they both suck. But there's even scenes I enjoy in that. Is this as good as the prequel we got to Predator a couple of years ago that went out just to streaming called Prey? No, I thought Prey was a superior movie. This is a fun movie. There's a lot of blood towards the end. There's a lot of violence. Fede got the assignment. My big critique of it is that there's just too much fan service. Just way too much. Way too much. This has been Joe Lewis of Bonehead Weekly reviewing Alien Romulus, which I enjoyed, but just too much fan service. Scarefest is almost here.
And welcome back, everybody, to the last final few moments with Stephanie Bingham here on Scarefest TV. Okay, I'm going to pitch an idea here. I think we should make this movie. Let's remake Twilight, but do it like with the ghouls that, the reason that people actually, the legend of stabbing them in the stake because they thought dead were coming out of their coffins, eating people. And so they figured if you nail them down, and that's how that all started. What do you think?
Be an excellent horror movie.
I see. We could fix. And I'm not even a fan of remakes, but I think that would sell.
But do they
would
still
stand
sparkle?
out at the high school.
Yeah, exactly. Face it, not the worst horror movie idea you've heard probably even today.
It's not.
See? So, that's about all we got.
I have one more question. So we have these great topics from you every year. What are you looking at right now? Now that you've looked at vampires and put together a presentation, what topic is piquing your interest right now?
Well, that's a very good question.
See, he's blowing my doors off tonight.
Talking about just yet. Vampires are sort of a universal topic for me. They're always on the table, but there are some very interesting sort of niche connections to it that have some very interesting things. Moon-eyed people would be the closest I'd be willing to say that I'm looking at the moment. So very strange, very local-ish.
Outstanding. Something to look forward to.
Absolutely.
So everybody, we're going to call it a night. Stephanie, you're a lovely guest as always. And once again, easily the smartest person in this room. So that's not, I didn't set the bar real high on that compliment, but you know what I mean.
Thank you so much for having me.
And it's always fun and you're always informative. And one of these days I have to go ghost hunting with you just because I want somebody that can talk to them. And,
Let's do it.
And hear them and unlike me, we're deaf and dumb when I go in. So everybody, this has been Scarefest TV. We'll be back next week. Hey, that's a council episode. So, hey, council episode. Brandon and Adrian are scheduled to be on, and you can just plaster them with your questions from, and we'll just try to get answers from both of them. Everybody, this has been Scarefest TV.